not going to start till maybe another 10 minutes or when?
Pardon?
We're not going to start for another 10 minutes or so?
Correct. Yeah.
We're gonna start.
Okay, we're gonna introduce what's happening, let them know there's gonna be an in-person activity, and then we're gonna start the presentation right at 2. So, and the off chance people are late, they can still participate based on the announcement that was made last night. And then so we can do the chair election.
We can't, Lorelei. She thinks she's
Gonna make
got 10 minutes.
Good evening. If anybody is joining us online on YouTube, we're going to get started shortly. This is a special design review committee meeting, public workshop, community character and objective design standards. So we're just going to get started shortly, giving some extra time for some potential late arrivals. Thank you.
We won't be able to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have you switch around.
Yeah, you don't have to these right here. Like that first row at the movie theater.
Yeah, yeah.
You're like, why did I even come out? Why did this come into
Yeah, my chiropractor would thank you.
We have popcorn.
Do you? Oh, right. Yeah. Why are you?
Oh, we have ices, cherry and Coke.
Why are you taunting my?
I know, I'm hungry too. Okay.
They're disappearing. One by one. Yeah. I'd love to do it, but. Sorry.
So until we actually start, I'm gonna keep this up, and then when we start, I'm gonna move to. Good? Okay. Just how many watching live? Huh? We're watching live. We're just seeing how many join us. Oh.
For the benefit of our viewers online, this was scheduled to start at 5:30 at City Council last night. And there was an announcement that it started at 6, so we're just trying to give a little more time to allow participants to get here. But we will be starting them momentarily to honor those that are in the room as well as those attending virtually. So thank you.
Please.
Good evening and welcome to the Design Review Committee special meeting, which we're going to be going over the objective design standards. Tonight, we have two absent members, our chair and vice chair, so I'm going to need one of you to go ahead and make a motion to elect a chair for the evening, and we need a second, and then we'll do a vote.
Go ahead.
I'll motion to nominate Committee Member Dunbar for the evening.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Member Dunbar?
Aye.
Member Sue?
Yes.
Member Kulke?
Yes.
Motion carries, and thank you, Member Dunbar, for serving as chair tonight.
Yeah, so I don't really have a lot of knowledge of the protocol, so you'll just need to guide me here.
Of
But
course.
I'd like to open the meeting, is it, yeah. I'd like to open the meeting with our first form, or do we do roll call? We'll need to do roll call first.
Sure.
Okay, so, Madam Chair, would you do the roll call?
Member Kulke?
Here.
Member Sue?
Here.
And Member Dunbar?
Here.
We have a quorum.
This is the time we set aside for public communication to talk about any item that's not on tonight's agenda. Madam Clerk, is there anyone who would like to speak to us on any item that is not on the agenda?
I believe the public comment cards I have are for the design guidelines.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the formal item number 2, objective design guidelines. Are there any members of the committee who have ex parte communications to report or need to recuse themselves from this item?
No, Chair.
No.
Thank you. Can we please have the staff's presentation?
Hi, good evening. My name is Maruha Klitze. I'm the Assistant Community Development Director here at the city. Our fearless leader, Rachel Diamond, our director, is here from Community Development as well. Thank you all for our participants here in person and online watching our first special workshop involving our objective design standards. Municipalities and jurisdictions are required to have objective design standards pursuant to a few Senate bills, Senate Bill 330, 35, and 9. So this has been a long overdue process for us, and we're excited to get started. We've utilized an existing contract we have on file with the city with John Kaliski Architects, and they're going to be taking us through an exercise as well as a presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity thereafter for public comment and DRC discussion. So with that, I will introduce John.
Hi, thank you very much. We're glad to be here. Thank you for having this meeting. We're looking forward to talking to everybody. I'm John Kaliski. I'm here with my colleague, Ami Bhatt. We kind of knew that there was going to be a little bit of splitting in terms of people online and them joining and the meeting sort of getting started at 2 different times. So we thought before we made the formal presentation, it might make sense to, because we're going to formally introduce ourselves in the presentation and what we've done and why we're here and sort of our initial thoughts based upon some moving around Ventura. But I'll hold that for a few minutes. And what we're going to do while we wait for sort of the more official 6 o'clock start point is go through a little exercise. And in some ways it might seem a bit banal to all of you, but it's actually incredibly important to all of us because you are the experts. You're the people who are on the design review committee. You deal with this on a weekly or bi-weekly basis.
So I'm going to stop you. Can you actually stand in that order?
Yes, I'm happy to stand over here. So I'm on television. Hello. Anyway, so you have to deal with this in a very formal way every couple of weeks, and I've been on those types of committees. I know what amount of responsibility that is and how much accountability you have to that. And you're the public who live here, and collectively you know way more about your community than we do. We only pass through it because both of us live in Los Angeles, and that's where our office is. So what we've done is designed a really super simple sticker exercise based upon what we've done in other cities and other communities, where we're going to give you 6 stickers. 2 of them have smiley faces on them. 2 of them are sort of, could go either way, and 2 of them are very unhappy. And then over here, what we have is images of buildings, new, old, and we'll actually show some even older ones in the formal presentation. And we just want you to distribute those stickers. And we've purposely limited the number of stickers that you have because we know that collectively, if you only have 2 choices that are happy faces, and you're presented with 24 images, it's going to tell us a lot more from a collective standpoint or a community standpoint, like where people are trending. And there are all sorts of ways that these objective design standards can be developed. We're starting off this exercise, I'm not going to say with a blank slate or an empty plate, but we also believe strongly that these are not our objective design standards. We're not coming here selling you an idea that you somehow have to agree with. We're really interested in what the community's voice is and what the community wants to get out of this, and we want to develop work in the long run that hopefully is as reflective of that as possible. So with that, what I'd ask you to do is come on up, take a look at the images. I'll get to you in just a second, and tell us what you think. And while we're waiting for the formal meeting, Ami and I are both happy to talk about any of the images with you one-on-one, introduce ourselves to you one-on-one, and just learn if you have something that you want to like really say before we've even done the presentation to us. We'd love to hear it while the exercise is going on. And then just to give you a little bit of a foretaste, there will be the formal presentation, and then there's a question and answer period after it. I think you guys will be the facilitators of that in terms of both asking questions, but also asking the public to comment or ask questions, and we'll make it as interactive as we can within the context of a Brown Act exercise. So with that, you had a question. Let me give you the microphone so everyone can hear your question.
Your request of us is a little vague from my point of view. There are very, very different functions for these buildings, and how can I compare one to another, apples to apples?
Okay, that is a great question. The question was, when we're looking at these buildings, some of them are small residential buildings, some of them are commercial buildings, some of them are old, some of them are new. How do we sort of think about that? Well, I think the really easy way to think about it is that we are not here to challenge land uses. We're not here to challenge or in any way upset the apple cart in terms of really basic principles of height, bulk, how big buildings can be. I mean, we can get into the edges of that, but what we are here to do is to really try to learn about and ultimately try to answer the question of what is Ventura character and to what extent can objective design standards, which are measurable and quantifiable, be introduced into your regulatory environment so that those become a common baseline that all projects have to follow. And so what we're really doing in a weird way is we're splitting what I would describe as the functional part of planning and architecture and landscape from what I would describe as the experiential part of it. Like, is there something that, like in a design review committee in particular, a lot of the time design review committees really don't have the opportunity to challenge, oh, that's a housing project in this location. The planning commission might do that, but the design review committee tends to have to comment on the character and the quality of the design. And the challenge for an exercise like this is to what extent can you introduce a baseline of quality and character issues into a regulatory regime that becomes a common baseline for either all projects within a district, all projects within multiple different types of districts, or in the city as a whole. And that's really what we're doing in this exercise. But we'll talk about that more. So does that answer your question a little bit? No. Great.
If I'm looking at these pictures and you're asking me to judge them, smiley face or not smiley face, as to which ones I think have the best character, that's one question. If you say which ones have the best quality, well, that's a construction as well as an aesthetic quality issue. They're kind of not quite the same. If you said, which of these do I just like from the standpoint of having lived here for as long as I have, and I think it fits the community better, that's a third question.
They're all intermixed with each other. They're all wise comments that you're making. But what you're not saying in this particular exercise is that multifamily housing project, we're not saying that it should never have been a multifamily housing project at that particular location. And we're also not saying, I mean, this is absurd, but you know, we don't really have any, with one sort of historic exception over here. Well, the easy way to say it is we're not putting any 10-story buildings up here or 15-story buildings, because generally speaking, 15-story buildings aren't something that's really on the table for the most part. And we're not proposing that, we're not suggesting that. If it comes out of this whole exercise that people want to see high-rises in downtown Ventura, well, we'll note that. Rachel will note that. But in some ways, we weren't hired to in any way. But if someone's building a 3-story, otherwise allowed building in Ventura, issues of detail, issues of what makes quality architecture, issues of character or experience that are the direct province of what these folks are doing, and I guess we're getting into the sort of the formal part, they do talk about those things. And the thing is that if a project is a housing project, and Rachel was starting to mention this earlier, because of state legislation, the city to a certain degree, like all cities and jurisdictions across California, have lost some ability to have those conversations about residential, multifamily, and mixed-use projects with a residential component. And what the state has said is you are allowed to talk about those things in the context of objective design standards, which are measurable and quantifiable. So all the things you're saying are exactly right. I agree with you. It's a hard thing to get your finger on, but what we have found, because we've done this in multiple jurisdictions, is that there are ways of getting at certain things that are commonly requested and get those written into the code so that, as a starting point at least, you can have more confidence and clarity that those are community-based values that you'd like to see, you know, in your projects. So it's complicated and it's nuanced and it's gray, but that's what we're doing here. So with that, I would say, I'm going to turn off this microphone unless there's another question. Oh, you have a question.
Well, first of all, my first question is this only applicable to multifamily and residential projects? We're not, even though there's commercial projects out there, these design standards, are they applicable to commercial or just to residential design?
They're applicable if we want them to be applicable.
Okay.
To some extent, we can widen it or lessen it, but that also has to do with how your planning processes bring projects through the approval process.
Okay. The other question or clarity that I was understanding, and maybe this will make it a little bit clearer to the gentleman, is that is this about style, character, and detail?
It could be about all of those or some of them. Like, for instance, the most easy way to think about it is that there was a choice made 40 or plus years ago, 50 plus years ago in Santa Barbara in the downtown to say that all of the buildings in the downtown needed to meet pretty rigorous stylistic requirements. We're not, and you'll see this later, we're not starting off with that as a basis at all, but if for some reason there was a giant popular upswelling of belief that every single building in Ventura should be X, this is an opportunity to describe that, learn about it, define it, and ultimately, potentially, if you wanted to, though I don't, from what I understand, you don't, but I might discover that's wrong, but it would be a potential opportunity to do that, yes. And we have, in fact, you know, we've recently worked in Palm Desert, and the first thing they said to us was, we want to work with you to define what does it mean to build a building in the desert, what is desert character, and we want that embedded in our code because we're not going to have as much opportunity to have conversations with developers, particularly on housing and mixed-use housing projects, as to what that is.
Okay, thanks.
So with that, what I would say is I'll turn off the microphone if there are no other questions. We'll do the sticker exercise. We'll all look at it and go, ah, no surprises. And then we'll transition into the formal presentation, where we'll describe some of this in more detail.
Didn't vote. No. Let's,
I'm gonna put these on my desk.
you could probably make some money and sell it.
Should we call the meeting to order? He is? Okay, okay, great. So we don't have to do anything. Is he in his presentation right now? Okay.
Okay, I've been ordered to move on to the next phase. Okay, I won't forget that. Not quite yet. Let me go over here where I'm on the TV. Okay, if everybody could take their seats, we're going to move on to the next part of the presentation. I have really enjoyed getting an earful from people already. So I encourage you to take your seats. We're going to proceed. So I think one thing that I can do is, I'm not going to try to summarize this completely, except to say that there are some images that have a lot of red dots on them, which I don't blame you for putting red dots on them. There are some that have some green dots and a lot of green dots on them, which is really, really interesting. Right over here, Rachel, this one. It seems only, and I think this person probably would have put a green dot on it, I suspect, but they ran out of their green dots. And that's something also that I don't want to overinterpret this, because I suspect that some that have a lot of yellow dots on them might be because they ran out of their green dots. And it's the beginning of a conversation, and it's not necessarily the solution itself, but it is interesting to see this. Okay, so with that, we'll get back to this unless there's any comment that anybody wants to make first before we move into the formal presentation. I see none. I'm going to come over here. Ami, do you want to run the slides? And so we're going to switch to the slide presentation now, which will hopefully explain a little bit more who we are, what we're doing here, what we hope to accomplish. And then I think we'll have a more structured conversation and input from all of you, which will help us understand what's going on. So I'll let the Design Review Committee sit down and get themselves situated because they had to switch positions. Okay, so we're here tonight, April 9th, 2025, in this special Design Review Committee meeting to talk about, in a general way, what is Ventura character, and to what extent, if any, can that begin to be embedded within the regulatory environment so that when projects come forward, particularly housing projects, meaning multifamily housing projects, and mixed-use projects with a residential component in them, meaning housing, which have fewer and fewer ability for the city to do anything other than to enforce what the existing rules are, that there's a baseline of enforcement that best reflects, hopefully, what the community's values are. So why are we here? Okay, we, ironically, this was not an exercise that was out there in the world, but we had an existing on-call urban design contract with the city of Ventura. And Rachel and the other staff basically contacted us and said, we see you have this contract. Can you do this type of exercise where we look at objective design standards, because we feel that we need a better regime of objective design standards in the city, because we don't have enough to hang our hat on when certain types of projects come in. And we're hearing that from the community. And we said, well, it just happens that we do this and that we've done 5 or 6 of these at this point. And so our office has been working we're working right now in Palos Verdes Estates. We've completed exercises in Palm Desert, in Palmdale. We are working in Temple City. We're working in Calabasas. And then in terms of just who I am and why I've been doing these things, we are both an architecture and an urban design firm. We've been in business since 2000. We do a lot of urban design visioning and regulations for future development for cities. We've worked all over Southern California. We also work on architecture projects. Most of our architecture projects for the last 10 years have been multifamily projects, some with a small mixed-use components. They're all in Los Angeles. Very few of them rise to the quality of what you have here, but we work on a very particular type of housing project, which is really trying to build attainable housing for folks who are basically income restricted. So there's a lot of sort of challenges with that. So we bring this combined experience of understanding what's constructible, understanding the constraints that people are subject to when they try to develop and design a project, and at the same time, we also bring the experience of being on the other side of the table in terms of working with communities to try to adopt standards. And the easiest way that I would describe it is that as an architect, I am really appreciative when a community has a very robust set of standards, because it helps me talk to the developer, because developers, there are good developers, there are developers who aren't as good, but the reality is that they're trying to make a project work from a financial standpoint. And while I would not sit here and say that they all cut corners, because they do not, but there are certain really subtle things about what makes a better building that get valued out of a building if nobody's requiring it. And so when we are the architects and we can point to a regulation and say, we have to do that, it actually helps us as well as it produces a better building. And I think developers in the long run, and particularly the better developers, appreciate that, because they want clarity and they want certainty in what it means, in how to get a project approved. So overall, for the folks who are doing hopefully honest work, it's a healthy thing to have the appropriate set of regulations in place for this. Okay, you want to go to the next slide. So I've mentioned this before, but basically the question that was put to us was, can you help us define what is Ventura quality and character? And that's a big question. You, as a community, have engaged that question almost continuously for 20 years at this point, through various documents and standards and regulations. And then if we could get to that point where we have a common understanding of what Ventura quality and character might be, can we propose some objective design standards, which I'll talk about in a moment, so that community expectations for what multifamily and mixed-use design should be are better articulated, regulated. There's more certainty that certain types of basic things will happen when a project is proposed. Okay, you want to go to the next one? So what is a development standard versus a design guideline? I mean, the easy way to describe it is that a development standard is a shall and a design guideline is a should. I've been doing this for a long time. At one point, I worked for the city of Los Angeles and ran all of their design review. And the reality is that when we were, as a state, really creating more and more design review commissions and committees and design guidelines, it was all based upon the idea that there would be a conversation in which people would come to a mutual idea about how you created something through conversation. You wrote guidelines for that. Well, you should do this. You should harmonize with this. You should be compatible with this. Over the last 10 years, particularly as the state has gone through its housing crisis, there's been less and less patience with that, both at local levels as well as at the state levels, and to a certain degree, some of that discretion has been taken away, and what, in essence, city jurisdictions have been told is that you can have design conversations, but they have to be embedded in your codes as shalls versus shoulds. And so if you look at it from that standpoint, you have a development standard. It's a provision that applies to a development, usually within a particular zone. The easiest ones to describe are you can only build to 40 feet, or you have to have a front yard setback, or you can only put so much density in a project. A design guideline is subjective in terms of how it's interpreted because it's a should. And here's an example: wall openings, shaped frames and sills should be used to enhance openings and add additional relief. I was literally doing this today, talking to a lawyer about a lawsuit in Los Angeles where folks really hate it. And we were going through the project, we were going through this so-called preservation plan, and we were trying to figure out statements like that and saying, well, how do you get anything objective out of that? What is measurable in that? What is quantitative? It's not the worst example that I've ever seen. Like the most difficult ones are when it says something like the building should be compatible. It's very difficult. You know, your compatibility might be different than mine. You know it when you see it, but it's hard to define. So an objective design standard in the end is something that is measurable and quantifiable, and it has to be affirmatively addressed, either yes or no, by the project applicant. It also is a standard that staff can look at and say, yes, you met it, or no, you did not meet it. So dwelling units that abut a public right-of-way shall orient the primary entryway toward the public street. If you've got primary entryway defined in the definitions, if you have public right-of-way defined in the definitions, and if it's a dwelling unit, it's pretty clear. It either has a public entryway or a primary entryway that's oriented towards the street, or it doesn't. And that's a yes/no. And so you don't have to have discussions about somebody who's decided to put the entries around the corner to the back. I mean, there are examples of buildings that do that successfully, but as a baseline running throughout the community, it may be that it's easier to just not give people that choice. Okay, you want to go to the next one? So we've been up here between the two of us 3 times. We are in Los Angeles. It is a hike. You know your community better than us, but since we've been retained to do this, I've made a visit, Ami's made a visit, and then we had the advantage of driving around the city actually almost a whole day with city staff, and we specifically asked staff to show us what you think is good, show us what you think is bad, tell us as much as you can about the controversies that have happened. And in doing this, and also between the two of us, have read every single design-related document now in the city, from your zoning code, to your specific plans, to your area plans, downtown, midtown, whatever they are. And that is, I will admit, I don't want to say I've absorbed it all, but we've learned a lot. And the thing that we've really learned is that there is no singular definition of what Ventura quality is. The one word that keeps coming out over and over again is that it's eclectic. Eclectic is one of those words that you know it when you see it, but it's kind of hard to define it. But one of the things I at least did was I sat down and I said, well, let's just go back to the beginning. What's really going on in Ventura? And so, This is an interesting image only because it's 1915 it was taken, which means, and it's already saying 130 years ago, which means that supposedly that wall was built in the earliest, literally the first day of the mission period, which I'm not sure that's possible, but someone here may know that that's exactly correct. But what is interesting to me about this photograph is that when this was built, they pretty much had to use the local materials. And so they found stones and they piled them up and they made what in essence was a aqueduct, and they're bringing water through that. But that probably gets closer, in my opinion, if you were starting at the very beginning to, there's an oak tree, there's a building built out of local materials, and there's the landscape and the climate and the light. And certainly, as you drive further north, those things start to change because the light changes, the amount of water changes, you know, once you get 200 miles up the coast or something like that. As you drive to the south, the landscape gets drier and drier and drier as you move down, you know, into Baja or whatever. So that's, and that has color. That's a black and white photograph, but that landscape has colors too. Okay, so you want to go to the next one. Okay, so then I really love this image only because it shows the mission, but it also shows some of the buildings that were there originally. It shows, you know, some of the fact that people were shading that side of the street because I suspect that that faces south, if I'm thinking correctly, or west, and I think it's south. But that's also Ventura quality at a certain moment in time. This is in the very late 1800s, I think. And it's got a certain scale to it, and the scale is not only height, but the sizes of the buildings themselves. And we're not necessarily completely going to challenge any of that type of stuff, but it is something that we're thinking about. You want to go to the next one. Someone was mentioning to me that we hadn't paid attention to any of the sort of more historic bungalow or crosses between bungalows and Victorian. I mean, we're very aware of it. We know that those houses are scattered out throughout the downtown in particular, and as you drive outside of the downtown, you see them occasionally, and then there's whole bunches of vernacular type housing that was built in the 1920s during the oil boom. So we're aware of those, but what's particular about these is, again, the materials, the shapes, the moment in which they were built. They're very reflective, and that's actually one of the interesting things of national trends in architecture that were going on at that time. You know, Ventura, just like Los Angeles, just like Santa Barbara. In fact, Santa Barbara looked a lot more like this than it looks like today until the earthquake. So they made a definitive choice to go in certain parts of their city a certain way, but before the earthquake, there were a lot more buildings like this in Santa Barbara. You want to go to the next one? And then, of course, you have your boom, the main street getting developed, and you see a whole potpourri of different types of buildings here, different types of materials being used, different types of styles, different sizes, but in general, sort of that orientation and the texture and the vitality of all these different forms jumbled together is something that reflects a certain type of both Main Street experience, but also an experience that has a certain type of texture to it. And that's Ventura quality too, though you could find the same quality in a lot of places. Then after the war, you start seeing contemporary buildings built within the city, some of which are now beloved, some of which I feel like are neglected, but they're also part of the scene as well. And there was an example up here, like 10 years ago, probably people wouldn't have been really interested in post and beam brutalism. But now, apparently, people are really interested in post and beam brutalism, and maybe that will become a landmark building. So, I mean, me personally, I love post and beam brutalism. That's why I became an architect. But, you know, the library is a wonderful building. Actually, there was a beautiful early 20th century library right behind it. Right, but you can't see it anymore. And, you know, let's imagine that this had never been built and today somebody was coming in to expand a library there. There would probably be an incredibly robust difficult conversation in this city about blocking the view of that old library and allowing this, and yet at this point, people probably really like this building as well. So some of this is just time, right? When is it built? What do you do? How do you make it good? Okay, you want to go to the next one? And then, of course, there's this building, which is still there as well. This is a Carl Mattson building. I mean, for any of you who are big fans of mid-century architecture in Southern California, this is an incredible landmark building. It's not, I would love it if it got put back together again, a little bit more, with a little bit of love. But when you look at this, at least in the photograph, it's a startling photograph, and it's sitting right next to a late 19th, early 20th century, you know, Queen Anne style thing with a wraparound porch. And that type of juxtaposition, that type of eclecticism is something that exists in this community and most communities, but whether or not people really want to support that, I think is part of what this exercise is as well. I mean, I think it's kind of cool, but in some communities, they might not care that much about it. Just go ahead. Oh, wait, you need a microphone if you're going to talk. Heather, you're...
Let me say I live near this building, and I've never liked it, and I believe it's vacant.
Doesn't look like that.
And it does not blend in, as you pointed out, and it should never have been built, in my opinion.
But if you were alive in 1959, this was probably thought by a lot of the people who did it as, well, modern is one word, but I was going to say an expression of the optimism of that moment in time. And that's the thing that's difficult, because people's values and ideas change over time as to what they value. When I was in school, people were just starting to discover Victorian architecture again, and there were the beginnings of like setting aside Victorian neighborhoods as preservation zones. Now in Los Angeles, in my neighborhood, which is an HPOZ neighborhood, the young people who are moving into the neighborhood really don't care about that anymore. They're wondering why they can't build SB9 projects and stuff like that within a historic neighborhood. So, you know, this conversation is a vital conversation. It's a useful conversation, but it's one in which there are lots of different opinions that you have to try to get at and form a working consensus towards. So, you know.
A follow-up comment, I would be interested to know what was there before.
Fair question. I don't know.
What was destroyed to make space for that?
I think there's much more sensitivity now in 2025 about those types of questions than there would have been in 1957 or 58 when this building was designed. Okay, you want to go to the next one? That's the last one of these. Okay, so we've been around, we've looked at a lot of things, and we thought as a way of further getting you either happy or mad at us, we would sort of describe some things that we saw, and then we'd conclude this with some observations or considerations that might help stimulate the conversation. Okay, so we agree. When we read all the documents, eclectic, 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 and we agree. There is no one style that stands out. It's very eclectic. In a successful way, it's a jumble. And it's kind of fantastic in that regard. And so you know, in talking to Rachel and staff, we didn't get the sense that, I mean, you may tell us otherwise, but we didn't get the sense that we were going to be asked to come up with a singular style for Ventura. Okay, but that's a challenge. So the city's not really defined by a particular architectural style, but there are a lot of what I would describe as human scale buildings and broken down massive bulk. It's what we refer to jokingly in our office as jiggly architecture. Things are jiggling all over the place, and part of the issue is well, how much is good jiggle and how much is bad jiggle? There are landmark buildings. They're not necessarily multifamily. They in many ways speak to Ventura character better than other things, and maybe that's a different but parallel conversation as to the robustness of your preservation challenges that you have or what you want to do with that, but those definitely set the tone. Our feeling is, and I know that you put red dots on a lot of these buildings and stuff, my personal opinion is that the baseline level of quality that you are getting through your current processes is higher than a lot of other communities that we've worked in. It's definitely higher than, I won't mention them, it's not fair, I'm on public cameras. And so whatever your controversies are or things that you're feeling, like when I look at a building like that, I can recognize where that building maybe isn't as good as it could be, but I do see broken down mass, I do see orientation to the street, I do see an attempt to get landscape into the building, which if it matured, would help do a lot of things. I do see a lot of attempts to try to create variety and texture, and I see that in projects throughout the city. And there are a lot of cities that you go to where you just see boxes. And so whatever the likes or dislikes of that are, in my mind, it does represent sort of the city having a dialogue with people who develop to try to push things a little bit further. And I think that's a positive thing that we've seen. Okay, I know some people put negative things on this one, but again, here we have a contemporary project where it's got a lot of apartment units in it. It's broken down into individual buildings. Each building is slightly different than the other building. They do that and accomplish that through use of different materials, varied skylines, inset windows, different types of activities at the ground floor, the beginnings of expression of base, middle, and top. So all of those things are happening, and we could say, well, did it happen well enough? I would say that's a fair conversation to have, but it is happening. And so which of those values to a certain degree makes sense maybe in an objective design standards regimen to make sure there. Here's a building that people said they really liked. Obviously, it's in some type of a Spanish revival style. This building has a lot of variety in it. You can see the setback at the third level. It's got house-like forms at the top. It's got a corner tower. It has a different expression at the base, the middle, and the top. It well addresses the street. It's a pretty successful building in a lot of ways. And you could say, I mean, I could literally go into this with Ami and we could just say, okay, inset windows, that should be there. A certain amount of transparency at the ground floor, a certain amount of orientation of entries to the street, things of that sort. And it's in some of your specific plans, but it's not in all of your specific plans. Or in some plans, it's described differently than it's described in other plans, which makes it a little bit complicated for someone trying to negotiate that in a consistent and clear way. Here's a project that maybe from a stylistic standpoint is more contemporary, and I know that, was that in here? Yeah, nobody even made a comment about that project. No one thought it was worth, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe this is just a background building, right, in Ventura. And that's another thing that's important to talk about because most buildings in cities are background buildings. And not every building needs to be a cause célèbre. Some of them just sit there. And one of the things that we consistently note in every city we work in is that people spend a lot of time on the buildings. They don't spend as much time on the landscape. And I learned this a long time ago. You can have really great urban design and terrible architecture, and you can have really great architecture and terrible urban design. And what you're looking for is some type of a balance. And so in my mind, when I look at this building, I try to imagine it 50 years from now. And 50 years from now, this building will look exactly the same because that landscape isn't going to modulate the buildings in any form or manner because it's palm trees. And palm trees have their place. I'm not against palm trees, but that's not going to have dappled light on it. It's not going to fade in and out of view based upon seeing pieces of it through the trees and stuff. So one place where there might be able to be found a little bit more commonality might be in taking a look at the landscape requirements and maybe making those a little bit more robust. Okay, you want to go to the next one. This is across the street. I think of this type of building that you see throughout Southern California. It's a pretty good example of it. You know, whoever was the architect, they were trying to not only respond to what were some of the codes that exist there, but they were also trying to make house-like forms, varied skyline expression, base, middle, top, use of more than one material, variation in coloration, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, you could write all those rules. They may not be as successful, or they may be more successful depending upon who the developer and the architect are. Okay. This one got some positive vibes, I think. Yes. I think people gave it secondary positive vibes. But I think the reason is because there's a clearly chosen architectural language. It's fairly consistent throughout. And then it's got, again, all these values that I think in some way people are trying to hope for, which has got sidewalk orientation, it's got a setback at the top level, it's got a varied skyline, it's jiggly. I mean, is it great architecture? Probably not, but is it good architecture? Is it responsive to its context? I would argue that it is. I think that it's a good example of what should be a norm, at least, that people are able to achieve in terms of making background buildings. It doesn't have to be great architecture, but does it make a more positive experience along the sidewalk? Yeah, it does. Does it have detail that you see when you're walking along the sidewalk? Yes, it does. Could the trees maybe be a little bit better? I think they could be. But that might be your downtown streetscape plan. I think, look, I know the people who did that plan extremely well, and I knew that when they did their drawings, they loved drawing palm trees. And it was very popular when they did them. Okay, you want to go to the next one. Here's a sort of simpler example. What's interesting to me about this one is not only the recessed windows, but the choice of brick as a material, which is obviously it's face brick, it's not real structural brick. But they were clearly trying to respond to that street, which has brick buildings on it. Again, it's broken down massing, it's oriented towards the sidewalk. It's probably in the long run going to look a lot better when those trees get bigger, because there you're not dealing with decorative trees as much, you're dealing with some shade producing trees. So it's interesting. Okay, so we also went through these documents. Those are all the documents that we read. I will admit, oh, you have a question. Oh, wait, you need a microphone. You're not allowed to speak without a microphone.
Don't really want anyone to hear me. You've made a number of comments about how the landscaping could improve the quality and character, I'll use those terms, of these buildings, and I totally agree. But I want you also to reflect on the reality that at the state level right now, regulations are being drafted that would remove that landscaping from within 10 feet of the building.
Only in a high fire hazard zone.
Which most of the downtown area is.
Well, that's a challenge, and I've talked to landscape architects about that. We're only landscape architects in our dreams, but I personally think it's a really, really thoughtless regulation, because if you look at the fires in Altadena and you look at the fires in Malibu, and you look at the fires in Pacific Palisades, what you're going to discover is that trees, particularly trees that grow in this landscape, for the most part, survived way better than the housing. So yeah. I think that there's a kind of knee-jerk reaction right now, and it's something that we're going to have to get through, but I would, as a city, resist that. Okay. So we read all these documents. I'll fully admit that Ami read most of them, but I concentrated on the downtown specific plan, and I read that, all 187 pages of it, and made notes throughout it. So when we read these documents, one of the things that we were trying to do was to really see what do they say about Ventura character. So there were some statements: make great places by insisting on the highest standards of quality in architecture, landscaping, and urban design. Cherish its distinctive, diverse, and eclectic neighborhoods, there's that word, and preserve their character. And then protect and restore natural features, beaches, hillsides, ocean views, rivers, open spaces, urban farmland. What's fascinating to me about all of these documents is they don't really talk about style. They don't really talk about detail. For the most part, they really talk about the size and scale and scope of individual buildings, and then some very basic principles related to them. So there is some talk in a lot of them about frontages, you know, porches, galleries, arcades. There's some discussion about how big is big when, you know, it gets too big. And you can see that when you drive around the city, that those things are being implemented. What's fascinating to us is that I think people were told, those people who did those exercises 10, 15, 20 years ago, that much of the same thing that we're talking about here, which is that, okay, it's eclectic, we don't want to have a singular way of doing things, we want quality, but the character and quality aspects weren't necessarily taken beyond the level of what I would call gross design standards. And that's where the challenge for us really is. Can we come up with something that is a second layer that's measurable and quantifiable that adds to those things that you already have, and maybe in the process of doing that, simplifies it and clarifies it? Okay, you want to go to the next one? So what we felt was that you have a lot of rich documents that are a result of a very nuanced block-by-block understanding of the existing conditions. That because you have so many documents, that it's kind of a complex, it's pretty complex to get through. And at times it lacks clarity, and it's definitely not simple to use. And everybody is telling cities throughout California, you gotta make it clearer and simpler. So it's hard. And that you basically have development standards and you don't have as many design standards. So you might want to consider an overarching set of objective design standards that establish a minimum basis of design performance. We're not, you know, in the end, and this gentleman here asked me this question earlier, and I said, you know, in reality, a quality project is done by a quality applicant who's working with a quality design team who care and want to do a quality project. When you're designing objective design standards, what you're trying to do is, if this is sort of the bell curve, and over here is true junk, and over here is like great architecture that's going to be in history books for the next 300 years, what you're trying to do is to try to keep the really bad stuff from happening, while recognizing that you may blunt to a certain degree the ability for someone to do anything they want to do over here. And that's okay in my opinion. I don't have any problems with that. But are there overarching things that, you know, make sense to write in that can be measured and quantified? You want to go to the next one? So, okay, so there are certain types of topics that we could spend more or less energy on in this exercise. Frontage and orientation, fences and walls, landscaping, roofscape variety, the nature of openings and windows, use of materials and colors, minimum, maximum modulation requirements. I mean, it might make sense to revisit that a little bit. More explicit base middle top expression, a little bit of diving into balconies and stairwells, water drainage devices. I only bring that up because in certain communities, they are obsessed over downspouts and gutters and things like that. Accessory building design, 360-degree design, which is on here, and then parking design, whether it's surface parking or some type of structure. So those are topics that we just are throwing out there. You may have very specific ones that you want to tell us about, which aren't even represented here. You want to go to the next one? Okay, so our next steps are we're going to listen to everybody tonight and have a already wonderful conversation. We're going to take an initial crack at a character statement to guide our work, where we try to actually say in a narrative way, maybe with some illustrations or images, we think this is what Ventura character is. So we try to expand that conversation a little bit beyond what I would describe as the sort of pretty generic descriptions of it right now in the statements. And then we're ultimately, through some more public process that we go through, some other study sessions with decision makers and with staff, of course, brainstorming with staff, we're going to eventually produce a recommendations memorandum that advises the city on future actions that might be taken to simplify and incorporate more objective design standards that might facilitate higher quality, or that would at least establish baselines for what quality definitions are for certain types of development in the city. I think what I imagine is that recommendations memorandum may have a whole bunch of potential objective design standards that we throw out as recommendations for consideration for adoption in an appropriate location within your codes. We're not literally rewriting the code or putting things in the code in this exercise, but we are making recommendations, and if those recommendations are adopted, then staff would sort of take them and build them into the various code documents over time. And then if they were adopted, when projects come in which have to be ministerial as opposed to discretionary, they would become the framework by which staff says yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Okay, so at this point, we have questions, and we're asking them to the Design Review Committee and to the public. Are we, in our initial work, have we understood what's happening here? Are there other things that we need to understand and learn more about in terms of what you'd like us to be looking at? And then secondarily, are there specific architectural characteristics that you think are important that you would like to see in some way addressed or even become objective standards? Or are there specific architectural characteristics that you think should just remain subjective? That, you know, don't worry about those. They'll get figured out some other way. And so what I think we're supposed to do at this point is I'll take your question, but I think the Design Review Committee is supposed to probably sit facing all of you, and probably you're supposed to be taking, well, you're supposed to run this in terms of questions and answers the way you'd run any other meeting of this type at this point. And we're here, and I know Rachel's here and other staff are here, and we'll help move this along. But before I do that, you had a question. Do we have a microphone for this person? You can use mine.
It's just really quick. So the objective design standards that we're going to be working on, are they going to replace all the specific plan standards?
I don't think they will, but I think that we might make recommendations, and I'll give you a very specific example of one. We might make a recommendation that the city, over time, map all the regulations that are in the various plans in a much more rigorous way so that it becomes easier. Like, if you look at the plans, there are slightly different setbacks for front yards on a block-by-block basis that also extend differences between plan versus plan. If you're trying to understand that at a glance, and it's never really mapped in a way that's clear, you have to do a lot of work to look at it. It's all there. For someone who is an absolute expert at it and takes the time to do it, you can figure it out. But for the average person looking at it, it's difficult. They want me to stand over here. Hello. Anyway, but we can talk more about that for sure. So with that, I will sit right here where people can see me. Ami, why don't you come sit with me? You should be on TV too. And we'll answer your questions or listen to your comments and take notes, and we're happy to do that.
And I think what we can do is if members of the public want to speak, you can come up to the podium. This way you're facing the camera, everyone can see you, you're facing the board, and we'll have the microphone right up here.
Well, I'll answer the first question. I think it's correct. I think it's correct that it's eclectic, but I would describe it more as like bricolage or what's a better word for it? Collage. Yeah. And I think that's great. I would hope that there aren't going to be specific, I guess, I don't want to say objective, but very strict guidelines. I enjoy that this city has, you know, like the image of the sorry, I have to take my glasses off because I can't read, but the Dudley House. I admire it. The Madsen building. Also, when I look at that and I see the building next to it, at least in this image, I imagined, well, what's on the other side? What's next door on the other side? And what could that be? Is that something else? You know, something built in the something nice from, you know, a different era. I don't want to say modern, but so yeah, that's my answer. Is as I think eclectic is a good description of at least the character of the city.
Bricolage is close to my heart.
Bricolage, yes.
Quickly, I would like to take down the questions. Does everybody have them written down? Because I would like to put it on for the people on YouTube to where they can see the members speaking. I can either have it on the presentation or the members speaking, so I just wanted to give everybody the opportunity to, you all got the questions? They're right here.
So, Heather?
Because I'm going to turn the PowerPoint off now and put it on the video.
Okay.
These are the questions you guys are answering, right?
We threw those questions out to facilitate the conversation. If you have other questions, we're more than happy to answer them. But fundamentally, I think, look, we're consultants, we're outsiders. We want to start off with an understanding of, a common understanding of what you think Ventura is. We don't want to contradict that. We think, in looking at all of your documents and talking to staff up to this point, that there are certain values which seem to be brought up over and over and over again. There is not a singular definition of architectural style. There is an attempt to break down scale. There is an attempt to kind of do, in most of the plans that we've seen, I don't want to call it traditional architecture, but I'd basically say architecture that relates to the sidewalk and is pedestrian-oriented. I think that gets a little more complicated as you get into some of the areas outside, or I shouldn't say outside, more distant from the original downtown. We are familiar with some of the conversations that you of a committee have had with the approval of projects, and we've seen some of those projects. But really what we're asking, are we understanding Ventura correctly in the limited time that we've had, or are we missing things that we also need to hear about? And then the other thing is are there actually specific architectural characteristics that you feel are universal to what you'd like to see produced in this town that in some way would be embedded within some type of framework of objective design standards?
Can I just ask a question here? I think what we're trying to do is figure out what a format we're going to have here, and so maybe we could defer to either Maruja or Rachel to see what you're looking from us as a committee. Should we answer these questions first and then put it out to the public, or should we have a discussion like we normally do in our meetings, and then that would give maybe more fodder for the public? I think we're just a little confused as to how to move forward here, so maybe we could get somebody to give us some guidance.
And thank you for the question. I think it's really what you feel so inclined to do. There is an opportunity, of course, to help, have a segment for public comment, right? But the idea is here, as you're the design experts, you review projects of varying, scale, size, uses here in the city, hearing your subject matter expertise on the matters, what you individually articulate as Ventura, what you hear on the board in your commission as Ventura. It's a common feedback that a lot of our applicants get going through the process, make it more Ventura. And we're really trying to hone in on what that means and how we can manifest that through a series of objective design standards to adhere to those regulatory requirements that we need, that we've been tasked to have through our housing element, from the state, and from our local decision makers. So I think a great way to move forward is heeding the question from our consultant team, conferring amongst yourselves, that may by way inspire the public with additional questions that they may have or comments. And, I think because it's a special meeting, there is a degree of conversation we can have, but I think it's more or less, let's have a conversation here at the table with DRC and our architect team. What do you each, 3 members of the DRC, envision of what is Ventura to you? And then after we feel we've had enough conversation, we can open up public comment, and then we can always go back to have further closing conversations. Does that help? Yes. All right, thanks.
I think so. Is the rest of the committee good with that sort of program? So we'll sort of have a quick conversation, I think, amongst us with the questions here and anything else, and then we open it up to public hearing.
Okay.
Sure.
Would that be agreeable to everybody? And then I think after the public hearing, then we can speak on some of the things that are brought up from the public. Sounds good. Okay. So let's just open it up for discussion amongst us. And so does anyone want to start?
Go ahead, if you want.
I thought the presentation was quite impressive, and it covers a lot of the subjects, and I agree with most of them that you mentioned. Yeah, I think so. Okay. I do agree with a lot of what you mentioned already. I think what it comes down to is the transitions between public and private spaces on some of these buildings might be lacking a little bit, especially if the programming requires, if the programming offers residential component on the street level, then there should be some sort of transitional spaces that's provided and not have the front doors right smack next to the sidewalks and stuff like that. Other than that, I think I agree with pretty much everything you said. Recessed windows and doors, I think those are must-have features for the projects here. I think you can see big differences just from the examples you gave. I think there's a big difference in elevation, the quality of the elevations from projects that had recessed windows versus not. The only thing that I would suggest also, and I don't know what the answer to this is, but I see those projects, especially the ones by the Seaward, those projects has fantastic ocean views, and yet the developer just came in and put in a bunch of units with, there's no, in my mind, there's no thought to the placements of the windows or the size of these windows to define those special units. They're just, same units repeated over and over again. But I think there's a missed opportunity for some of these developments that we have now that could take advantage of that view that we have, and maybe through that develop an architectural style or adjust some of those models to be a little bit different, to take advantage of that.
I'm wondering, is there a way to write guidelines that really address the function of light, right? As opposed to window, right? Or opening, so that instead of, well, there's a guideline that forces, I don't say force, but makes the developer architect really address how light comes into certainly a public residential space inside of a public space inside a residential dwelling, right? Is there a way to do that? I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I think instead of really focusing on window and window detail, whether it's recessed or not, I kind of tend to disagree with the recessed. I think if it's pertinent to the way that the light is coming in, then yeah, I recess it more or less, right? Or have some kind of shade feature. So really functionality of how those building components work, I would say, is a better way to mandate, let's say. I don't know. That's my thought. I don't know if that's a good one or not, but.
Well, I appreciate what you've put together, and I know it's a very difficult subject to tackle. And I will say that we, as a design review committee, would be very grateful to have, really objective and measurable requirements, because we do have people come in and say, you can say whatever you want, but we can put it through now because we have this right. And so for us to have measurable things that can stop something that really isn't working for us would be very valuable. In addition to saying that, I think it's very difficult to say recess the windows, that's part of our thing, because I was just pointing out the Ventura Inn, which I don't know how many happy faces that got, but that's a very flat-faced, square, rectangular, blocky building, and yet there's a certain beauty to it. So I'm very hesitant to say things need to have this, that and the other thing. I think, and I spoke to somebody in the audience earlier, I think one of the things that we'd like to say that I think is universal is we don't want fake things. I would prefer to say no vinyl windows, that we have no foam, that we have, where stucco is supposed to look like something that's not stucco. We want to have detailing. I think it's the detailing that needs to be true to the style. I think it's difficult to specify a style in our community because we have so many styles. And so we can't say Spanish, this is going in and out. We can't say Spanish because, like Santa Barbara, we have so many styles that we've already developed.
I think that one's going out. I'll put it back. Oh, I'm sorry.
And so I am hesitant, and I don't know how you would do this personally, is to sort of dictate a style because we have so many. I'm kind of throwing things out. I know I'm not solving a problem, but I think if we get into the detailing of the project and have those be more objective than the actual style be subjective, I think we might be more successful. That said, I don't have your job, and I'm thankful. So that, and what was the second question? I don't.
Well, you began to answer the second question, and both of you, in fact, by talking about, you were talking about differentiation in terms of the light and recognition of that in terms of the architecture somehow, and you began to talk a little bit about, well, you said, I'm not comfortable with a universal prescription towards recess. You were saying a little bit of the same thing. Both of you were talking about not necessarily wanting to make it style-based. And what I would say is that it's helpful to hear you talk about this, because one of the things we can do with, and what we have done in some projects, is if we're concentrating on windows and openings, we will lay out a menu. And it will say, something to the effect that, windows and openings need to meet one of the following ways of doing it. So you give people choices, but let's say if you have a flat window, you could say that it has to have some type of expression that creates a shadow across it.
That's great.
Or you can have a recessed window and you don't have to do that. Or you can use a steel window and do whatever you want with it. So there's a way of basically writing it as a menu where the developer and the architect have the choice of doing it 3 different ways or 4 different ways. And staff can say, yeah, they did it that way. But you, in essence, would not be allowed to just use, you wouldn't have the choice, in essence, of taking a thin, self-flashing vinyl window and using a flat stucco mold with it. Because you'd have to put some other treatment on the window if you chose to use that type of window. So there are ways of sort of doing it so that if somebody wants to build that building with the cheaper windows, that it's forcing them then to give something else as well in relationship to the opening. So I think by giving people choices, you can begin to get there without dictating it or saying it has to be, 1920s Monterey Spanish revival or something like that.
Right, okay, that's refreshing. I'm glad to hear that.
But-
Go ahead.
So my only concern with that would be, what about, is there an out for, when you do get a really good architect, a really great architect, and they don't want to do either of those options,
I love that
they will,
question.
but they will think about it. So what's the recourse for that if they're kind of
Well, there are
tied
2
to-
recourses, one of which I already mentioned, and then there's a second one. The first one is that you may discourage that person from working in this town. And that may be okay. Because I would argue that the moment in which that type of honorific was sort of just automatically assumed to be good, that passed, that's over. But I hear you, and I think the other one is that in any of these systems, it's a little bit complicated to explain, but you only get so many waivers. Usually, like if someone's working with a density bonus project under the state rules, you get like 5+1 or something like that. So if you have 30 design standards, they could theoretically waive one, or if they can't meet it at all, they throw themselves into a discretionary process, which would be coming to you anyway. So it's a tricky game. I don't have that much worry about Frank Gehry being able to figure this stuff out. I mean, I've worked with Frank. He's hired me to do his little buildings that he doesn't show anybody. He knows this stuff inside and out, and the same thing is true for most of the folks that truly you're probably thinking about somewhere. in the
Well,
back
I
of
wasn't
your head.
thinking that caliber, but
No. But really, it's like who really is who is a good architect that you can mention who's going to sit there and with a menu of things that says you can use a steel window and do it any way you want, or you can use this, or you can use that, is going to come in and say, what I really want to do is vinyl windows that are completely flat. Who's going to do that? Nobody.
no one. Yeah. Oh, good point. Good.
I have one more comment. So how do you, as you were stating, like we are eclectic, we're a beach town. Things, we tend to have a little bit lower scale buildings. We want it to be a very walkable town. But we have these views and we have, some intense sort of solar application that you want to avoid or address. And then another is massing. Like, how do you, as the consultant, write things that can say So we have something to set back on, that you need to address the views. You need to acknowledge the orientation that you know, and also keep it more at a pedestrian level. How do you write those codes for us to reinforce, or for us to enforce?
Well, part of the problem is that the world of all the design decisions that you need to make is vast, and we can't, at least yet, write an algorithm that produces that. I mean, we're going to get there pretty quickly in the next 5 years probably, but I think the reason that we're sitting here and asking you, tell us what are the things that are most important to you, is that we probably can write something. So like, for instance, or illustrate it. You just mentioned the idea, I think I heard you refer a little bit to, for some reason okay, I'll give you an example. You can basically write a standard that says the top floor, or the top floor of building can't be more than 80% of the size of the floor immediately below it. Now, you're not necessarily telling that person where to modulate it, but you're forcing some type of massing breakdown into the building and giving the designer a choice of how to do it. Now, it may be that, and you can also say that, you know, all roofs need to be sloped between certain angles. I mean, I'm not saying you should do that. It's just, there are a million ways of getting at it. I think what the issue is, you have to sort of like pick and choose, because we're not writing a zoning code for you, or we're not going to recommend that. What we are suggesting is, are there a dozen or 16 or 20 issues that it makes sense to put some type of a baseline in, so that you don't have to have that conversation, that it's just, yeah, you got to do this, and then if you're actually talking to them, you can do something else. Like, okay, another example would be color. Like, you don't necessarily have to say that everything is one color, but you can define a little bit color if you want to. Or you could say that, you know, you can't have more than 3 colors on a building. Or you could say that, to use your example that you brought up earlier about the sort of orientation to the sidewalk, you can define a certain amount of transparency that's a minimum that has to be there if it's along a certain type of a right-of-way or something like that. So I do think there are ways of getting at it, but we're trying to discover which are the ones that you really want us to go after. I mean, if left to our own devices, you know, it's a huge exercise, and I'm not sure we have enough resources to do it. But if we can focus on what's most important, then I think we can come back and give you some suggestions.
Do you guys have anything more? Does the council or the committee have anything more to add before we open it up to the public hearing?
Well, I think based on what some of the project I have seen in the past, my only comment is no, what I call the pancake architecture. It's just layers up on layers and floor up on the floor, exactly identical. My pet peeve was seeing those, but with circulation stacking as well, all the way up. Especially with exterior balconies, so you just wind up with these.
So you don't. You're saying that you're concerned about projects that come in where it's kind of a formula of stacked apartments.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, certainly that building over there that has all the yellow dots on it, that is stacked units, but they kind of figured out how to kind of modulate it.
Yeah, or that second board top left picture where the 3rd floor, the balconies that are all kind of stacked.
This particular element is a complete mystery to me. I don't understand it at all. That it's a single loaded exit corridor that's facing the street, but when you look at it in aerial, I can't figure out what those doors are going to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, are you saying articulated plans or
Just
even
articulate it
facade?
or have some more thought into the circulation of the whole building in general, I guess, rather than just say, okay, this is where the stair tower is, and let's just make the stairs goes up all the way up. You know, maybe have some creativity by, and I don't know how you would phrase this into a policy, but you know, maybe the stair is every 2 floors, but the intermediate floors stairs are located somewhere else. I don't know, so that they don't appear to be stacking on the exterior elevations.
Yeah, might be some building code challenges doing
Yeah,
that. But you know, I understand what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Or differentiation of massing. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a way you could, yeah.
Well, there's a project that came in years ago, actually, but the developer basically had multiple towers, but they're connected by bridges between the towers, and the bridges just go across like pancakes. It's just, yeah, it's less than ideal.
The bridges were less than ideal?
Yeah, because they were just stacking them, yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Are you ready to open it up to the public?
We can, if you want.
Yes, so we are going to run the public comment a little bit different than a normal hearing tonight. We're going to open it up. I'm going to call one comment. We're going to have 3 minutes for public speaking time. So within that 3 minutes, you can go ahead and ask any of the questions that you would like and make any of the comments that you would like. And then once the comment is over, we're going to open it back up to the DRC members or to John to answer your questions. And then we will invite the next person up to speak for their 3 minutes, and it will follow the same pattern. So we'll start with our first speaker, who is Kathy Bremer.
I heard a couple things from the panel here, the DRC, that I'm in 100% agreement with. No styrofoam and no front doors that bounce right out onto the sidewalk. I think we really need to focus on more green space and setbacks that allow the planting of large trees to soften some of the harshness of some of the buildings we're building. I'm personally not a fan of the more geometric square box look. That's my personal opinion. Setbacks, I think there was a project that came before City Council last night that honestly I fear that we are not dealing with setbacks properly, and I don't know if that's your purview or Planning Commission. But when you have a very tall building right adjacent to one-story single-family homes, I think we need to be much more sensitive to the adjacent neighborhood. And I think we need what we might call a good neighbor policy to ensure that that happens, that we're not overwhelming the neighborhood too close to existing homes. And I just wanted to say too, eclectic has kind of a flexible interpretation in Ventura. And sometimes it has led to just nutty structures like the bus stop at the mall. So I think we need to come to kind of a better understanding of what we mean by eclectic. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So do we start?
Yes.
Does anyone have anyone?
Provide any
responses?
feedback or comments that you would like.
Do you have any
I
comments?
agree with the bus stop. And yeah, I don't know how you differentiate between good eclecticism and bad eclecticism.
And I guess this is really just if there was questions, like particular questions that the public person had. So if it's just them, I guess if you're just making comments, there's no reason to, we'll just keep moving through it. Does that work for everybody? Okay, great.
Okay.
Eric Berg.
Good evening. I wasn't quite sure I was going to provide comment, but as a local landscape architect, I think landscape is well under my purview. What I will say about eclectic, though, and I think it was kind of mentioned a little bit, you kind of led, I think you led to it a little bit, is this sense of wonder that it creates when you're walking around in the urban environment. When everything is the same, you lose the individuality of spaces, and what eclectic gives you is a reason to see what's around the corner, because you know that it's not going to be the same as what you just walked by, and you start to notice things that are different. And I really love that about Ventura. It's one of the things I notice. The dichotomy between the Matson building and the Victorian right next door, and then the Tiki Bar that's right on the corner, that to me is just fantastic. I used to have the pleasure of walking to work every day, and you'd see on that block alone, the Elks Lodge, now the hotel, the Matson building, the Victorian, the Tiki Bar, all on that same block. And then you'd hit E.P. Foster Library right on the next block. That to me is Ventura's quality core in its same, and that to me is what eclectic brings. With regards, I think, speaking more to landscape, some of the things I've been trying to find ways of getting into standards are existing tree preservation is a big thing where on sites that we have them. We don't have a lot of ordinances in the city of Ventura that allow for protection and or mitigation when they're lost. Noting that trees have to be removed for things to happen occasionally. It doesn't mean that every tree is preserved forever, but that we need ways to make sure that developments try, as opposed to just demoing and saying that everything goes. On that too, we're fortunate in that the building code now has, in the green code of the building code, has better ordinances for landscape than it's ever had before, and it's getting harder, whereas we may have not had those at the local level. But I'd love to see those come out from a building official and more into your conversation in DRC and Planning Commission, because they're often pushed to the back and building officials don't know how to enforce them necessarily. So the Green Code has tree shade requirements for hardscape, softscape, anything that's in the landscape that requires a certain percentage of that to be shaded by trees and to produce a study. I have yet to see that incorporated into design or a conversation at this stage. It's often pushed back. So I think that is something that's already there that you can bring forward in the review process and ask for applicants to start thinking about. With regards to landscape, knowing our environment and where we're at, a really easy one, no invasive plants per the Invasive Plant Council list is an easy design standard. That's a thing that's online. A lot of sustainable design criteria already do that. We shouldn't be planting invasive plants as it is. So being able to vet a plant list against an invasive plant list, something really easy and objective to do. Percent coverage is another one in the landscape space. May or may not be the best, but it's another one to look at. And then also looking at water use requirements, making sure that we're not promoting high water use plants or having some sort of a requirement. We're required to use a database called WCALS for water use, and making sure that you only allow X percentage above moderate or something like that.
Thank you, Eric. Time's up.
I have a question. I don't know who to ask this. What applicants required to present to us going to be addressed as part of the design guidelines, or is that something separate?
So that's generally viewed as something separate than the objective design standards themselves, but certainly that's the type of thing that we do still want to hear from you, because I think that that type of information is helpful in reviewing projects, and so there's going to be a lot of kind of additional anecdotal information that we get from this process, and so we're open to those types of comments as well. Like, we like these types of things, and we need, for example, more window details so that we understand the fenestration of a project or something like that too. So absolutely, we welcome those things. It won't be incorporated as part of an objective design standard, though. It's something that we're working on with our updated application forms, just to give people really clear understanding of exactly what details we want on every single sheet. And so that's something that we should have rolled out for planning pretty soon as well. And something we can bring to you as a informational item to get your input as well. So we'll bring that back to you, actually. Thanks.
Thank you. Christy Weir?
I have one.
Excuse
question
me,
I just
sorry.
wanted to bring up to John. So how would you, one of the things that we see here is, unfortunately, Jack isn't here, our other committee member who's a landscape architect, but I know that he spends a lot of time saying, you don't want to use that plant here, you don't want to use this plant here. And it's more the lifeblood of the plant, not so much as you were speaking, having sort of, not a palm tree. It's less about what the plant is going to be and how it's going to relate to the building as it is that species isn't working here. And I'm wondering if in your design guidelines, can you incorporate some of those things regarding the landscape? Besides like a certain percentage or something like that, but actually, incorporating exactly what you had said prior. I'm not going to mess it up by saying it again because you had said it beautifully.
I think the answer is yes. It's challenging because in general, there's not a vast body of information out there about how landscape is written about as objective design standards as much as there are for other elements. I think part of it is doing some of what you were describing, is taking a look at what the city's recommended plant types are and making that more didactic. And you, to some extent, you want to develop a fairly robust list, but you can also refer to certain types of performance standards as well. Some of it might be, and this is the part that I'll admit I'm thinking more about as I'm listening to all of this, notwithstanding whatever the state fire marshal is doing, which I actually don't know how to really respond to at this point, because that, like everything else at the state, it's people in an office building writing things, God only knows from what point of view. But I feel like you can write standards about trees that are, well, there are several different ways of doing it, first of all. You can, and I don't recall seeing this in any of the documents here, but are there requirements for the number of trees that you're required to plant in this city?
No.
Okay. So a lot of the jurisdictions we work in will literally say that you have to plant a certain number of trees based upon the number of units or something like that. The more profound one, I think, is the issue you were getting at, which is what do you do about landmark trees that basically, you could get very specific. Like in the city of Los Angeles, you can't rip out an oak tree, period, end of story, unless you go through a whole parallel process. I think what you could do, though, is that if you identify a tree of a certain, let's say, caliber or drip line or something like that, without necessarily saying from a design standard standpoint that you have to say it, you could say either the tree should be maintained or an equivalent area set aside on the site that's 80% of the drip line that is documented. And then that gets also to what does the city require in terms of application materials. But there are ways that you could basically introduce tree requirements into typical development projects. But I also want to be just a little bit careful about that, just because what you're building in your downtown in terms of lot coverage might be different than what you're building out in Pierpont Bay or whatever it's called. So I don't know that it's universal, but I definitely know that you could get there.
Thank you, John.
And I think it would be well worthwhile.
Can I just ask one more question, sorry, of Rachel? Is one of the things that I see a lot is those vine grills that are empty. And so one of the things about landscape architecture is you can plan all you want, but you have to plan for the tree to get this big, or that you have to maintain that vine, because you might as well just have the grill be the architectural design of the project. And is there any way that you can enforce that? And it would also go back to you, but once it is, say, in the design standards, is there a way that it is moderated as the building ages? Because unlike architecture, you have to maintain it, but it doesn't grow and change and develop into something that may be unsightly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely opportunities to regulate kind of maintenance standards effectively. And I think from our standpoint, as we look at what the development review process is today, what we want it to be in the future, should we want something like that, I think that there are ways to incorporate conditions of approval for certain projects that require ongoing maintenance, and then it becomes an issue for code enforcement to keep up with them, but also to do ongoing inspections with planning, I think can also address a lot of that. But we would need to be pretty detailed in what we want. And I think for some of those like trellis type landscaping that can be really amazing, like an entire landscaped wall is one of my favorite things, but you do often see them failing, not for a lack of effort often, but for a number of reasons. And sometimes things need to be replanted the same way a tree could be placed in the wrong location and potentially die and also have to be replaced. So I think a little bit outside of what we typically consider objective design standards, but I think to some of the points we've heard and will hear, clearly landscaping, I think, is something that people are really interested in, and we can look at being way more prescriptive for projects to get kind of a fuller, more lush outcome, or whatever outcome it is for landscaping that we want.
Okay, ready? Christy Weir?
Thank you. Thank you for your great presentation. It was really good. It's good to see those pictures up there. They're very eclectic. And some of them, as you can see, are not the popular eclectic look. The landscape, okay, first of all, this is the 1997 design guidelines, which is fabulous. I don't think there's anything in here that people would disagree with. It's not prescriptive enough because it says should. For instance, here's one of my favorites. Mature trees should be preserved and incorporated into the design of a project. There's a lot here, and it just doesn't say shall. So I'm hoping you use this very thoroughly. The eclectic thing, we've been dealing with this for 30 years probably, and what we don't want is eclectic to mean a combination of anything goes. And that's what we see on your photos, is kind of an anything goes. I would say some of that isn't good architecture. So eclectic, what we want is a nice variety of good architecture, not a variety of all different qualities of horrible architecture mixed with good. That's not the eclectic we're looking for. And as far as requirements, which this 97 design guidelines does cover partially, but I think one of the reasons the boxy buildings aren't popular is because the dimensionality is not there. They seem flat. And part of that, the dimension comes from features like recessed windows, recessed doors, stepped back upper floors, pilasters, cornices, that sort of thing. I think there needs to be shall in the design standards. And a 1-inch trim around a flat window, 1-inch think trim, it's not the same as a 3-inch recessed window. It's just not, So that, I think we have to tell people how far to recess a window, because you see some of the new developments, there's just no dimension at all, because there's no shadowing. The the colors in here, there's a nice little chart that shows, you know, the exterior walls should be light colored and you save the dark, you know, the blacks and the rich colors for the accents. That's in here. The fake materials, in the 97 guidelines, that doesn't address fake materials because people weren't using styrofoam and other things back then. But we have some of our luxury developers using foam. So if we could not allow that. And it would be great if we could define neighborhood character by neighborhood and talk about our city's neighborhoods. Like Midtown is different than West Side, which is different than the college area. We don't have one city standard for neighborhood character.
Thank you, Christy. Our next speaker is Carol Spector.
I also wasn't going to speak tonight, but I figure we're here and, you know, you might as well hear from us. So I don't have a lot of facts to present, but neighborhood character. I do think that each neighborhood has its look and its character, and I would like to be able to preserve that. Interesting details, walkability, sidewalks, garden, trees. Let's keep that, whether it's an apartment building or homes. I think we need to see that. Step backs, if anything's 2 or 3 stories, anything past that needs to be stepped back so we don't feel like it's enclosed. We're here because we love the hills and the oceans and our beautiful neighborhoods, and if we're going to have these tall things that enclose us, it's horrible. So I want to have sunlight and views, really important. I would like things that get built to look like they've always been here. I know that doesn't really satisfy an architect's, I'll say ego, I don't know if that, I'm not trying to be pejorative, but we want things to look like they've always been here. We came here because we love its old school, beautiful, calm, welcoming feeling, and that's what we would like to see continued. Let me think. I think we need to respect what's established. We keep hearing emerging. I don't think we want a lot of emerging. Change is good, and we need to do that, but we want what's established. That's why we love living here. So let's think. Colors, I do. Nothing on Johnson Drive, if you see it, there's all these black buildings. We want to keep things nothing too bright, nothing too dark. It needs to fit in. We don't want to look like Santa Barbara. Everything shouldn't be Mediterranean looking the same. I'll use the word eclectic, but good eclectic. You know, we just love how our city looks. Oh, that's probably good enough.
Thank you, Carol. Our next speaker is Wendy Sauter.
Thank you for having this meeting tonight. It's appreciated. Some of the thoughts I have, and some of it that's already been said, I agree with. But what I'm wondering is if we have these objective design standards with the density bonus law, with the developer being able to get as many waivers as they want, how are we going to enforce that? One of the things that really hits home to me are the fact that, as you mentioned, we do have smaller scale buildings. Well, the ones that are coming up are getting higher and higher and more boxy and boxy, and it's really problematic in a coastal community where we do have beautiful views of the ocean and the hills, and I hate to see that being destroyed. Step backs, you know, how do we ensure that? How do we ensure that 3 lots don't combine into one huge, massive, boxy building? And as mentioned, I think eclectic could go kind of awry. So maybe there's a lot of different designs we could have, not just, you know, Spanish or Mediterranean, but have a palette to choose from. So those are my main concerns, but I'd like to know how we can enforce what we're hoping to do, and I don't know if being a charter city makes a difference or not. So I just have a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Bob Guthrie.
On your list of documents that you reviewed, it probably was on there, but I wasn't sure. I don't even know what the name of the document is. I call it the new multifamily overlay, but that was prepared by the DRC, actually not you three, it was previous members. And that document has a lot of really good stuff in it. Step backs are in there, you know, window alignment when you're adjacent to a residential building, avoiding that. So if you didn't have that one, I just wanted to say try to get it. There was a small group of us that sent in a list of 16 different items pertaining to suggestions for objective design standards. And none of us come even remotely close to being design professionals, so hopefully that list, I'm sure that list will get to you. But take it with a grain of salt. But the things we put in there, what we tried to do is, I mean, this is a tough job. For you, this is an incredibly tough job, and you do this. We thought of it from the standpoint of, okay, what are some common things that make a good building, and what are some common things that make a less good building? I'm not going to read those, but some of them, actually most of them have been talked about already. There was a couple, the size of courtyards, at least in the downtown specific plan, it's defined as a function of the size of the lot, which is good. But now with there being, you know, a density bonus going taller, smaller units, there's, you know, where what used to be maybe a 1,200 square foot apartment is now a 600 square foot apartment. It seems like there ought to be a function of both size of the lot and the number of units that are included. That's could be very objective. I'm trying to think if there's, of the 16, if there's anything else that would be worth pointing out. Yeah, we did put in no downspouts because we know Al Engelman's, that's a hot button for him. And it's right, it does look. Minimum unobstructed sidewalk width. We have sidewalk widths specified, but when you put a tree well in there, or you allow furniture, or, you know, signs, whatever, because pedestrian scale and walkability is really important. So minimum unobstructed sidewalk widths would be important. And another thing is sidewalk width relative to height. I mean, we have it specified in areas of downtown, but again, with density bonus law and being able to go taller and taller, that width of the sidewalk needs to be wider to keep the pedestrian scale in line. You showed a picture of the Ventura Inn, which is fairly tall, I think it's 60 feet, but the sidewalk there is 20 feet wide. So when you look at it, it all seems in scale. So, and there's others, but I think my time's about up.
You got that down. Okay, our next speaker is Pete Freeman.
Good evening. I'm going to just read something to you. Step backs of street-facing portions of a building, a minimum of 10 feet at floor 3 and every other floor thereafter, unless the project is adjacent to a single-family home, and then starting at floor 2. If adjacent to a single-family home on a non-street facing side, then the step-back requirement applies on that side of the street. So I think this might be, and I'm going to probably butcher your name, Mr. Sue, comment about the pancake, breaking up the massing, if we have something like that, and also, like Ms. Bremer said, the good neighbor policy, where if we're adjacent to a single-family home, we don't tower over that home. There was a slide that you had modulation, and it said modulation and something else, and I think that was to break up the massing. Also, are we going to have one document for the city? Because, as stated before, we have different communities and different neighborhoods. You know, you have the Mission area, which might be different than Front Street, which is very different than Victoria and Telephone or the East Side. So I don't know if one document's going to be able to cover all that. The modern building that you showed on Main Street, the famous one, I would wonder what you would consider objective design standard used in that building. And then also, I'd like to agree on the 1997 design guidelines that we have, that just reviewing that, it was like, yes, 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 yes. Everything in there was just, yes, this is what we want. I think this is what we're looking for. So I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Pete. I might mess your last name up, but David Lantrick.
First of all, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to come here and keep this conversation going, because over the last decade or two, it's been very difficult to feel like we have an input into this design process. There's been numerous surveys given to us over the decades where we've given feedback about what it is that we feel the character of Ventura is and what we want to see in terms of design standards. Some have been written into the 1997 standards, others, who knows where they are. But the basic ideas that I think need to be incorporated in this pattern language for Ventura, this is not one set of objective design standards that will be appropriate for any other community. Ventura is unique, Ventura has a history, and we need to incorporate not only the physical urban planning considerations into the objective design standards, but also those things that the citizens feel are most important. And you go, well, what are those things? What is the character that we think of when we think of Ventura? You go back to the surveys, you go back to the mission or the vision statement on the first page of the downtown plan. We talk about working together to protect the characteristics we cherish the most, such as the beach town character. I mean, I've heard discussions about what is a beach town character forever. And if you don't know it, you're not going to get it. It's kind of one of those things where Ventura is unique because it's always been known as a beach town. And not everybody goes to the beach. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that we're on the ocean. We're a coastal town. We're nestled between the ocean and mountains that we really love and we want to see. So there's a connection to the natural environment that's an important aspect to this. And so when we say, well, we don't want high buildings, it's not just an arbitrary feeling of being enclosed in canyons. It also is the idea that we want to see these natural assets that this unique location has. We want a close level community, so that feeling of being part of a community. We don't want to lose that to the urban environment. So the diversity of cultures, races, and ethnicities, it's, you know, this word eclectic doesn't really grab it. It doesn't grab it because eclectic isn't just the buildings. It's not just the way in which the town is different over here than it is over here. It's the kind of people that are attracted to Ventura, and it's the lifestyle and the culture of Ventura. All of that somehow has to be captured in the pattern language that drive the decisions, drive the objective design standards. And I really wish you a lot of luck in doing that. And if you need help, please just call us back again, right? Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Lilith.
Which obviously wasn't planned. Sitting here, a number of thoughts, random, just came to me. One of them was people kept on saying, well, what eclectic, what does that mean? When you used it sort of relating to the people and culture, this wouldn't apply. When it comes to buildings, what came to my mind was variety, that there's a variety of buildings, rather than just using the word eclectic. Another thing that came to me, and I have said, I only got involved with the whole building development stuff maybe in the last 4, 5, 6 years. So I'm kind of late to the game. And I've been told that most of the buildings that are already up were approved long before that time. And so we had a whole different group of people that were making these decisions at that time. And what I've said is that the buildings that are up now, most of them, you could take a picture of them and put them all up on a wall And most people wouldn't be able to tell you where they lived, where the building was, because there's just no personality to them. So I think personality is another word that comes to my mind. And there, I have said, and said tonight, there's only one building that I've seen that's gone up that I know of in the last whatever years that I personally feel belongs here, that actually looks like it belongs here. Somebody, I think, used that same concept. And that's the apartments across from Cafe Nouveau on Thompson. That looks like it's been here, like it's a part of our community. So why can't we have more like that rather than all the boxes that are around that nobody could tell you which street they were on, which corner they amassed on, because they're mass is what they are. They're massive. And just one other random thought, and we have no control over that. You have no control over that. Talking about landscape products and using natives, locals. Just on a very personal thing, in my neighborhood, a house was built up, redeveloped, redesigned, re-landscaped. I was walking around, and all along the parkway and on part of the actual property, there is all these lovely cuttings of ice plant. And I am terribly tempted to go out at midnight and pull them all out. But anyhow, those are my thoughts on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilith. And we have no additional comment?
Well, we can open it up to our comments, but I wanted to just thank everybody for coming out here. This is a really nice turnout, and it's so wonderful. I'm so grateful that you have taken the time out of your evening to come and give us feedback so that we can better develop these standards, because they are objective, so they're difficult, and we need to get feedback like this. It's not just design; it's actual, objective, quantifiable, measurable standards that are going to be difficult to come to, and we need to get a whole variety of criteria. And so I just wanted to really thank everybody for coming and spending their time and thinking about what you were going to say, and hopefully you'll follow this process all the way through so that we can continue to develop these into a really great set of standards, because I'm excited about it after hearing you. So we can just pass it on to the next person, and we could talk about this.
Did you want to?
No, go ahead. Go you.
I too wanted to thank everybody for coming. I think all of you have brought in a lot of good points. There's a lot of occurring themes here also, I think. The only thing that I wanted to reiterate probably is about the landscaping components of this. I think the landscaping components could be a lot stronger within this skyline. So.
I guess I really only have, to thank everyone who came, and I don't have really any more additional comments.
Okay, so do you have any? Well, I have a couple of things I'd like to state, but does anyone else have any more, of the criteria? I think you're looking for, what are some subjects which you've gotten from the public, and do we have any more sort of subjects that we want to make sure that they're included? Because I think this is our opportunity to be able to, and I'm going to speak to our chair, who would be here saying, let's talk about having something on the roof, let's talk about the downspouts. Is there any way we can incorporate those? So we're not always asking about it and so I think we need to think about this. And maybe this isn't the exact time. Maybe it's the next meeting so we have some time to think about it. But I think this is our opportunity to be able to get something in writing in these standards that we don't have to keep coming back and asking and having it sort of be a maybe, or we'll think about it or whatever, because they are quantifiable. And John has said that he can give different options, so that's even better, because now we don't have to have something specific. This is his area of expertise, and he can come up with those. But for me, it's a great opportunity to say we don't want the roof. We don't want to be able to view the equipment on the roof rather than having to ask about it. You've spoken about the different heights of roofs so that we have a modulation of massing. These are our opportunities, and I'm not saying we have the answers right now, or I shouldn't say answers, but we have the criteria right now to talk about it. But I think we should, think about this very deeply, because this is our opportunity, to establish guidelines, not just for the style, but for the building. So the building has certain criteria that's going to meet our needs in our community, and the style is yet another piece of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
To the point that, like you said, no stacking, no stacking circulation, things like that maybe don't adhere to this or don't address a style, eclectic or not. It's more about the actual building. We want the roof. I mean, there's cities that say you can't have, you have to have continuous membrane roofing on flat roofs, so that when you're looking down on them, you're not seeing a lot of, or to use the roof, because that's another item that we've discussed quite a bit, that the roofing especially in our downtown areas, maybe have multi-use on it rather than just be dead space. We have great views, we have all these things, so this is our opportunity, and I'm kind of excited about it, to say this is an opportunity for us as a committee and you as a community to speak to these things and see if we can get something above and beyond whether we want wood windows or metal windows or details at the level of the facade. So I think this is our opportunity to really look at this a little deeper and maybe a little more holistically, to not have to be asking for things that we shouldn't have to ask for if we don't want to. If we want to set a certain standard of our building quality rather than design, I think we can incorporate those items also.
Well, I know there's certain jurisdictions that basically made a rule and says no vinyl windows and no vinyl fencing. I don't know if we are going with that direction in terms of the city as well. We'll definitely support that, obviously. I think there's a couple of board members here that would absolutely encourages that, both for environmental reasons and also aesthetics and sustainability issues. In terms of roofing, yeah, I think Chair had mentioned that he'd like to see projects with more activated roofs, especially in areas where there could be a tremendous potential for public spaces to serve the community if you have an activated roof with views and stuff like that. My things that I focus on it's the variation of the roofs and the heights. I know there's few tricks that architects usually play with in terms of having a gable or having, and maybe that would be a thing, so that it will minimize the boxiness of these buildings. If some of these buildings are designed with sloping or gable roofs and stuff like that, and look into more of a different variety of play heights rather than just having, you could have the same play height and different roof orientations on different models, but ultimately they still have the same elevations. But if you start playing with the scale and part of it ties into with the stepping back of the buildings as well, right? So the first floor should be the biggest footprint, and then the second floor should step back a little bit. And by doing that and playing with the elevations and the play heights, that could create more interest to the building and also visually scale it back without sacrificing. And I know what a lot of developer wants is they want to maximize their profit, they want to maximize the units they can build on the site, but doing that doesn't sacrifice those things. They could make the building look smaller by having the elevations well designed and still maintain the same number of units that they are looking for.
Well, I would say, oh man, I guess I'm having difficulty thinking of specifics because I would say I'm more, I don't know how to describe this, as libertarian on this point, in the sense that I want people to do what they want, but in no way do I want to see terrible architecture. And I don't know how to specify or create a guideline that says that. Don't do terrible. But so I'm having a difficult time just coming up with that. But if we're really speaking about multifamily housing projects, I would be okay with finding specific guidelines that, all our multifamily housing projects start looking like these guidelines. I would be okay with that. But in other projects, I don't know, I think I still lean toward, like, let people do what they want, but how do we prevent them to, I'm not going to point at any projects over there, but, how do we prevent? Thank you.
Well, I think that's John's job, is to kind of take what we're saying, and then he gets to put it in language that gives guidelines, and that they're objective guidelines. I think that's what Ami and John's job is, and we're to come up with, sort of the things that are important to us, if I'm correct here. And so I think I agree with you. I don't really like to tell somebody how to make a style. I've been in this field for a long time, and I've been in front of a lot of community meetings and juries and things like that, and what they think as a craftsman and what I think as a craftsman may be two different things. And so I'm always been hesitant to tell somebody how to design something. But I also think that if we go in a bigger picture of like having the detailing and the products be authentic, and we can maybe get that standardized in a way. I think when you talked about the sidewalks based on the height or the massing of the building, that's that's an objective comment. And that's also about, again, the building, not about the style. So I think there's a lot of things that we can incorporate here that doesn't have to do with the style. It doesn't have to, we don't have to address the style so much, because we do have a variety of a lot of different types. And, so I think that we don't have to tell people. I agree with you. I think it's hard to tell people what you're saying is not what I'm thinking it is. But I think that's his job, that we can put some minor criteria down.
Sometimes people, some architects will surprise you and come up with something really great, but it doesn't really fit the norm,
Question for Rachel. So when you have these warrants and exceptions, then it means that you have these criteria, and there's times that you don't have to meet that criteria, and that's when you ask for a warrant. Is that sort of the way that it works when it's design? I understand how that works sometimes with like a zoning requirement and more concrete things, but does it also, like, let's say they don't want to do the windows this way, so they're asking for a warrant and they're going to give us this. Is that something that would be applicable to in like a design decision?
So with objective design standards, there are kind of a few avenues where, frankly, people could work around them or request ways around or through those standards. With like a density bonus project, for example, you have concessions and waivers. They get a specific number of concessions that they could potentially utilize to say, for example, if we had an objective design standard that said your windows need to be inset 3 inches, they could say, we request that be one of our concessions to not do that. You could also, because it's a physical improvement, request a waiver, and the waivers are allowed in an unlimited amount. But there are some limitations there. It does have to be a physical improvement that would otherwise make the project unaffordable. So that's kind of an open hoop for them to go through. So there are going to be ways for people to get around this. Without density bonus law, there's also the request for variances. Here it's waivers and exceptions depending on where things are. And so it wouldn't necessarily be since we're not doing this, we'll do something else, but they would need to meet the findings required. But we certainly could structure certain requirements as, if you're not providing this, then here are some other things that you can do to offset that so that we have options potentially for people. One example, someone brought up the overlay that we created for our housing element sites along Johnson that could potentially be applied elsewhere. And just using the inset windows as an example, you have to do 3-inch inset windows unless you have certain framing, and then it's and trim, and then it's 1 inch. So there are kind of options to explore. But yeah, the reality of state housing law is we can set all of this up and create good standards, and people will still be able to kind of at least request to not utilize all of them. But I think kind of having that overall foundation of here are the things we really want every project to have, I think gives people a sense of kind of the baseline of what the community wants. And ultimately, if they're kind of easy to achieve and create a better project, I think we'll continue to see them. The issue becomes where some of these standards can be expensive, and that's where people start to request exceptions to those rules. So we're going to have to find a balance. And I think also, as we develop standards, talk to architects in the community about what does this really mean. And I think that's something that John and his team does really well, is can reflect what objective design standards actually do to the price of a project. And I know that's something you're really good at too. And so I think that type of information will be really helpful moving forward.
In line with that, I know there used to be I forget the name of it, but in the DRC they would have a confirmation of details. That's what it was called. Do they have that anymore? And how do we assert that what has been set up on the design, approved design, is being built out in the field? Because as we all know, things change in the construction process, and even if it's not purposeful, you sometimes have to change your materials. And so how does that, is that still in effect, and how does that work through if there is a change?
We do still have that process, but I will admit that that's probably a flawed aspect of our process because it's not resulting in the quality of details that we're expecting often at the DRC level. And I think that, again, this is a little bit peripheral to this specific conversation, but it's super relevant in that we, in improving that process, I think would have much stronger kind of results from the objective design standards. And then also as a result of the comments that people get from DRC and kind of getting into the details, I think there's also a training component for our team to really better understand architectural details and really what we're looking for. And so I think some of that could bleed into the objective design standards about really specifics that we can lean on and construction details that we want to help us understand more clearly what people are constructing. And I think, value engineering happens to almost every project that we see, and that's okay, and that's part of the process. But I think it's incumbent on us to improve that, confirmation of design details so that when people are value engineering, we're still getting that same quality, albeit maybe the insides are a little different.
Are there any other comments?
I'll just jump in and say thank you so much to everyone who showed up. I know most of you I saw at 1 o'clock in the morning last night, so I know there are a lot of things to do. You know, to your point about having more input, there's definitely more opportunity, you know, particularly because there's just 3 of you this evening. I think we will have another opportunity to sit down with the DRC to talk about this. And also additional opportunities to speak with the community and weigh in and understand. We're still working through some of those things, so definitely stay tuned. But, you know, this is part of and kind of as a result of the 500 other projects that we're doing at the city, kind of all at the same time. As all of you know, we've been working on the general plan. We're in year 6 of that project and trying to wrap that up. The draft of the general plan will actually be released next week. So stay tuned for that. Definitely take a look at planventura.com. And I think, you know, now having kickstarted this process, we may see more conversation about the objective design standards and including that in our implementation in the general plan as well to make sure that this process is kind of woven into all of these other plans. As part of the general plan update and our implementation process, kind of next steps beyond the general plan, we'll be adopting a new municipal code, or rather the zoning ordinance, not the entire municipal code. But that is going to be a process where we also incorporate a lot of this work as well as looking at all of the individual plans and seeing what remains, what we need to evaluate, look at again, start new planning processes. So there's a lot of different pieces that are all going to play into this project as well. And so there's a lot of things happening. I just appreciate all of your involvement, and we'll keep you apprised of next steps as we know them.
So there are no next steps that are coming up? I mean, there's no confirmed next steps?
John, do you want to talk about kind of your process moving forward?
Me talk about it.
Sure. So we have 2 major next steps that are on the agenda. One is to obviously draft this character statement that John mentioned in the presentation, and then our final output would be a memorandum of recommendations based on what we've heard. In order to get that to that point, we do have, you know, scoped out time for other engagement sessions, but we haven't planned out exactly what those are. They're in the scope of work. We just need to figure out exactly what those events are and how they can be implemented based on, you know, as Rachel was saying, other events that are going on in the city schedule, because we don't want to, you know, overwhelm you with different events to come to, because we want to make sure that we're getting appropriate input and not tiring you guys out. So I think there's a bit of scheduling that's happening, but we are scoped for more events. Oh, yeah.
Thanks so much for everyone's feedback. I think that's the close of this item. And again, we'll keep everyone apprised of future steps. So thank you.
Do we have to?
Heather, do we
Do we have to adjourn?
do we just adjourn, or do we have to go through the rest of this meeting? No. Okay, so we're adjourned.
Yeah, meeting's adjourned.